What would happen if humans disappeared? It could be said that humans have really done a number on the planet. We've created a mess with our industrialization, the creation of toxic chemicals, garbage dumps and oceans filled with plastic, and giant urban sprawls that have eaten up big chunks of nature. With all this stuff happening, it might not be a bad idea if suddenly humans disappeared overnight. It's obvious a lot of things would be happening during the cataclysmic disappearance. With that said, let's run a mind thought experiment and see what would happen if humans disappeared. Imagine a world in motion. Humans are controlling all kinds of systems, vehicles, machines, and aircraft. If we suddenly disappeared, it is assumed that the machines that we are operating would come to a halt, but not without a lot of ensuing chaos. Airplanes would fall from the sky. Cars would keep going in the direction they were moving without anyone to control or stop them. And machines we control to build things would either keep drilling, digging, or moving something. With nothing controlling these machines, there would be at least an hour to several hours of destruction. It would be a good thing that humans would be missing from this part of our disappearance. This doesn't even include factories, coal and power plants, gasworks, oil refineries, nuclear power plants, and other industrial places that have some sort of problem without humans at the controls. However, it is very probable that the lights will go out first, and likely within a few hours should we cease to exist. The only power plants that would still be making power would be hydroelectric plants like the Hoover Dam. These could provide power for months, perhaps even years, without any type of human maintenance. Speaking of water, there are some places in the world that use pumps to keep groundwater from flooding streets and metro and subway tunnels. These areas would likely fill with water with no power to operate them. Nuclear power plants would automatically go into safe mode at some point, and fossil fuel plants would run out of energy shortly after. If the systems in nuclear power plants shut everything down, there would likely be no disasters such as Fukushima or Chernobyl. However, there is still a chance of nuclear meltdown at a plant that would result in tons of radioactive matter escaping into the air, water, or soil, causing radiation contamination worldwide. Spent nuclear fuel for nuclear power plants is generally stored in pools and on-site facilities. Without people to ensure that this water remains cool, the heat of the fuel rods boils it away, and the fuel rods catch fire. The resulting nuclear disasters spread fallout over large areas. Most plants and animals within the affected zones die. The bigger problem would be chemical plants that create dangerous chemicals. These plants are carefully controlled and maintained. Many chemicals require electricity to remain stable. Cut the power in these plants, and you suddenly have a big problem. The plants could explode, and the chemicals that would be released into the Earth's atmosphere would create a chemical nuclear winter. Sewage treatment facilities fail without electricity, leaving sewage treatment plants useless. Raw sewage begins polluting rivers and lakes. Unlike unattended nuclear power plants, unattended oil refineries would explode, as they are already dangerous even with a crew managing operations, not to mention the time bombs left in petroleum tanks, chemical plants, and power plants that might poison the earth beneath them for eons. However, if that didn't destroy all other living things, then the animals would become the rulers of the world. Shortly after humans were gone, animals would then take over the world. Perhaps even the insects would also be a big part of this new ecosystem without humans. Animals that were domesticated have to suddenly fight for survival. Most food on the supermarket shelves and inside home refrigerators has rotted. Pets still trapped inside houses can drink the water leaking from thawed freezers, but a mass die-off of domestic animals begins. Those that can escape homes and yards will begin to scavenge for food, but many domestic dog breeds, especially small dogs and those bred for special qualities like stubby legs and short muzzles, will be unable to survive long in the wild. This would lead to many wild animals going into cities, or making their way to farms, or grazing pastures to hunt as they normally would. After several years, the animal populations might change or balance themselves out. Domestic cats and dogs would have to learn to be wild or face extinction now without their human providers. Bears, lions, and other wild animals would be able to go wherever they please without humans to stop them. With no more electric fences to corral them, about 1 billion pigs, 1.5 billion cows, and 20 billion chickens would either starve to death or become food for other animals. After just 2 weeks, from Japan to California, 3.5 million tons of garbage goes uncollected, and storms wash some of it out to sea, increasing the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. After the months, perhaps years of us disappearing, our cities and the Earth would start to change and adapt. Most of the cities might start to become overgrown with trees, plants, and vines. This is assuming that the chemical winter or radiation from nuclear power plants that lost their cooling systems didn't put the Earth back into the Dark Ages. Plants have taken over, turning manicured lawns into overgrown fields. Weeds grow in cracks in the roads, eventually forming a layer of nutrient-poor topsoil where clover fields take root. Plants and ivy take root in stone and masonry work and begin to damage the foundations of buildings. Wild animals will have found shelter in the abandoned cities. Sparked by lightning storms, many wildfires will go unchecked without people to fight them. These fires can burn down entire towns and damage cities such as Chicago, San Francisco, and Rome. The charred rubble provides the nitrogen that plants need to grow, and plant life consumes the ruins. Satellites that were put into orbit would likely start to fall to the Earth like shooting stars. And after 3 years, the International Space Station would lose its altitude and fall to Earth. Without anyone taking care of things like roads and buildings, roads would be cracked or covered with thick vines or moss as the Earth started to take back what rightfully belonged to her in the beginning. New trees grow in home gardens. Vehicles and other metallic structures begin to succumb to corrosion that strips away paint and protective coatings, resulting in rust that eats through metal. Many of the 1 billion automobiles will soon degrade into hollow husks. After 30 years, the Earth will be a very different place without humans. Most houses and buildings would have begun to deteriorate and collapse. With the weather being unchanged, tornadoes, hurricanes, and other violent weather would strip places of homes and buildings, never to be rebuilt again. Grasslands and expanding forest would overrun cities and urban neighborhoods. Birds of prey like eagles or hawks would make their nests in skyscrapers long left vacant. Anything made of metal, such as cars or building structures, would be covered in rust from oxidation and disintegration. Packs of feral dogs would roam streets looking for their next meal, while some large animals would be thriving in the ruins of big cities. Sea life would possibly make a big recovery without overfishing, and the oceans might be once again filled with huge schools of fish. Whales would make a comeback and roam the oceans once again. Some buildings would collapse after years of moisture, with most northern cities having gutted skyscrapers filled with rainwater and snow. After years of rainwater pouring through floors and rotting ceilings, the cold would freeze it, and cracks would appear in the concrete pillars and walls. After many years, the buildings would eventually collapse. There would be an eerie silence that covered the face of the planet without humans. The planet is not a constant place. Without humans, the most excessive industrial carbon dioxide would dissipate within 200 years, which would cool the atmosphere. With no further chlorine and bromine leaking skyward, within decades the ozone layer would replenish, and ultraviolet damage would subside. During that same span, every dam on Earth would silt up and spill over. Rivers would again carry nutrients towards the oceans and seas where most life would have survived, as it was long before vertebrates crawled onto the shore. The cooling phase would probably bring on another ice age. Life would survive in other forms, the plants and the animals, and the planet would likely heal itself. Everything man-made would have rusted or decayed by now. Some skyscrapers would still likely be standing, although there would be nothing left but rusted and decayed skeletons. But there would be some small signs here and there that at one time, an intelligent species that once ruled the planet. And after 1,000 years, you might have to look very hard for signs that humans ever existed. A newly formed planet covered with wild animals, forests of green, ice sheets in the northern hemisphere. If there is anything important to be learned from this experiment, it is the impact we have on the world around us. The damage that we have caused to simply exist in a world that really doesn't belong to us. It is a grim tale to think about the Earth long after we are gone, but the Earth has survived far worse than anything humans have ever done, and it will survive long after we are gone.